Event Horizon is a better Hellraiser in space than Hellraiser in space. They called it Bloodline, but it was totally Hellraiser in space. In 1996, the Hellraiser series claimed the questionable distinction of being the first Earthbound horror franchise to go into space. At whatever point you learned this information, your first question was undoubtedly, did we need a Hellraiser in space? No, but here we are. In space. Pinhead. In space. It's Pinhead in space. A year later, Leprechaun did it, and Friday the 13th a little after that, but Hellraiser 4 Bloodline was the first to be like, yeah, space! And while Jason the Leprechaun would at least go on to do other interesting things, Bloodline is arguably the last real Hellraiser movie. The last 5 don't even count. Parts 5 through 8 are all made from unrelated scripts with Pinhead jammed into them, and the less said about the 9th movie, the better. Actually, series creator Clive Barker did have one interesting thing to say about anyone claiming Hellraiser Revelations came from the mind of Clive Barker. It's not even from my butthole. Anyway, whether we need it or not, we got Hellraiser Bloodline, and let me start by saying I'm not here to drag the movie, and it gets credit for only having a budget of $4 million to Event Horizon's $60 million budget. And there are things about Bloodline that I really like. I don't mind seeing the origin of the puzzle box. Pinhead has some nice dialogue.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
And they even let the mayor of Icetown be in it. But it also features moments like this. And this. I'm just saying that by this point the series had veered wildly off the path it began on back in 1987 when it was just about a creepy uncle living in Dad's spare room. Well, not just about that, but that's what it was about. Bloodline was then contrasted a year later by another movie about a gateway to hell in space called Event Horizon. In that movie, Sam Neill creates a ship called the Event Horizon, the first supposedly capable of faster-than-light travel. The whole thing's powered by a gravity drive that opens a hole in space, allowing you to travel to wherever. But on a test run, the Event Horizon opens a gate and disappears to parts unknown. When it suddenly appears 7 years later, Sam Neill and Cowboy Curtis discover that the ship has been lost in hell all this time. At first glance, Event Horizon doesn't seem to have that much in common with the Hellraiser series, aside from the gateway to hell aspect. But the truth is, if someone were to imagine a best-case scenario of Hellraiser goes to the space, most people wouldn't picture Bloodline. They'd picture something closer to Event Horizon. And I'm not even talking about the fact that Bloodline takes place like 2/3 on Earth. I'm talking about tone and execution and a bunch of other reasons that I will now go into unnecessary detail about. First off, Event Horizon feels more like an early Hellraiser movie than Bloodline does. I'm going to dig into the first 3 Hellraiser movies for a moment just to give this some context, but I feel like I should mention I'm not going to go super deep. I could go on at length about how Julia was supposed to be the ongoing villain, and how Pinhead's name was never really Pinhead, and how Le Marchand,
Merchant?
Yeah, Merchant. Let's go with Merchant. How Merchant was different in the book, but I'll save all that for another time. For now, I'm just skimming the surface of what's going on in these movies to make a point. At a purely surface level, the Hellraiser series centers around a puzzle box, basically a Rubik's Cube from hell. If a person manages to find the box and solve it, the reward is a visit from the Cenobites, a pack of leather fetish demons with no safe words. See, solving the box is supposed to be the end result of an obsessive quest to find the furthest reaches of human experience and knowledge. In the first movie, Frank finds the box in what appears to be some remote part of the world. You instantly get the idea he's been around and has probably seen some shit and he really wants to see some more. So he opens the box and the Cenobites come and they stick a bunch of hooks in him and take him straight to Ramsay Bolton's FetLife account forever. In Hellbound Hellraiser 2, Dr. Chenard has dedicated his life to not only finding the box, but also illegally experimenting with the limits of human psychology and physiology via his patients. He wants to see it all, and he goes to insane lengths to observe the Cenobites firsthand. Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth, aside from having a subtitle a little too on the nose, is also piping hot garbage. A lot of people like it, I don't, that's fine. But I feel like it started to move away from the more sophisticated tone of the earlier movies and into hokey slasher territory. Pinhead annihilates a nightclub full of people probably sounded super cool on paper, but it's a terrible visual. And it has the worst period, Cenobites period, ever period. Meat CD head, just why? The one theme all these movies have in common is the obsessive desire for forbidden knowledge being a literal pathway to hell. It's very biblical, Adam and Eve and the apple, and, it's not at all subtle. Pinhead flat out says it.
It is not hands that call us. It is desire.
So keeping all that in mind, which of these two Hellgate and space movies better fit those themes? On one hand, you have Bloodline. One of its biggest problems as a Hellraiser movie, and as a movie period, is that it's missing a solid human antagonist. There's no Frank, or Julie, or Dr. Chenard, or even Douchey McGee from Hell on Earth. Merchant and his descendants are dedicated to their work, but that's hardly the limits of human experience. Angelique is a demon, and she has vague conquer-the-world motivation, but that's it. The closest we get to a solid human antagonist is this guy, and he's only in the movie for maybe 10 minutes. He's not an integral part of the overarching plot, so that's a massive defining aspect of the series missing altogether. On the other hand, Dr. Weir has dedicated his life to creating the Event Horizon, and specifically its gravity drive, solely for the purpose of going where no human being has ever been. It's implied that his perpetual absence from home was a factor in his wife's depression and eventual suicide. When the Event Horizon does show up again after 7 years, he's the first one in line to go to friggin' Neptune and get it back. And when the ship starts to tease the existence of terrible wonders in another realm, he's fully on board, and is more than willing to bring all of his new friends along for the ride. In this sense, he absolutely fits right into the Hellraiser series alongside Frank and Chenard. Moving right along, Event Horizon actually tries to be scary. The first two Hellraiser movies in particular don't just go for outright slasher gore for the sake of cheap shock value. I mean, obviously they're super gory, but there's weight and purpose behind it all. And they actually try to create a sense of dread and horror. Like I said, Hell on Earth moves away from that, and for the most part so does Bloodline. There are a couple of scenes where Bloodline goes for genuine suspense, but they're short and they don't land as well as in the earlier movies. Event Horizon, on the other hand, does its best to be legitimately frightening. And like with most scary movies, your mileage may vary, but it's definitely trying. There are long drawn-out sequences where they go for actual tension, and unlike in Bloodline, there's real effort to make you somewhat invested in the characters. Perfect example of this is the clear surrogate mother-son relationship between Justin and Peters. Justin is referred to as Baby Bear, and she's referred to as Mama Bear. You get a sense they've spent a lot of time together on floating tin cans of death and formed a genuine bond. In fact, Justin seems to be the entire crew's beloved junior member, which makes the prospect of him being blown out in airlock all the more horrifying. He's young and vulnerable and clearly loved without the lazier trope of him being an actual child in danger. You don't want to see anything spectacularly horrible happen to him, like being blown out in airlock. And that's what makes this one of the best scenes in the movie. In fact, Event Horizon is soaked with one thing Bloodline never touches on, and that's the insane f***ing terror of being in space to begin with. Bloodline doesn't focus on that aspect because the movie's not really about being in space, but it's obviously a blown opportunity. A blown opportunity, Coral! While we're on the subject of floating tin cans of death, let's talk about the ship designs, or in the case of Bloodline, I guess the space station design. Bloodline went for, let's call it sci-fi channel chic, whereas Event Horizon went for something that actually seems Lamont configuration-esque. I know the relative realism of the sets is partly budgetary, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about pure design. Event Horizon went for a lot of intricate circles and squares that, intentionally or not, invoke the style of the puzzle box. Bloodline went for this, and it's not entirely the fault of a limited budget. We know from the segment set in 1996 they could build puzzle box inspired sets, and given the purpose of the station as a sort of reverse puzzle box, any design choices to that end would have been totally justified. There's not really any reason at all for the Event Horizon to look like a f***ing nightmare except they thought it'd be scarier. Don't read that wrong, I love the Event Horizon design. It just belongs in a Hellraiser movie. So, when you're looking at the larger themes that made the early Hellraiser movies so damn good, it's pretty obvious Event Horizon nails them better than Bloodline does. And there's a bunch of smaller examples too. Event Horizon shares the early Hellraiser's love for horrifying hallucinatory sequences. They both... you know what, I'm just gonna blaze through the rest of these. Somewhere in a melding of Bloodline and Event Horizon is the perfect Hellraiser in space. Most of it plays out exactly like Event Horizon except near the end. Weir turns on the gravity drive and the Cenobites arrive. Pinhead tells Weir that his family has been making these devices for generations, going all the way back to the original merchant who we see in a flashback. And maybe the gravity drive is cube-shaped.